The violent roar of the river's rapids tore through the serene landscape as Vanessa Keller clung to her baby with desperate arms, the powerful current threatening to claim them both. The spring of 1879 had brought unprecedented rainfall to the southwest, turning the usually placid Gila River into a raging monster that had swept her carriage away when she attempted to ford what she thought was a safe crossing. Now, with each passing second, her strength waned as the murky waters pulled at her skirts and the precious bundle against her chest wailed in terror. Zachary Xavier had been tracking a small herd of wild mustangs along the riverbank when he heard the screams. At 28, he'd spent half his life in the saddle, working cattle drives from Texas to Montana. But nothing had prepared him for the sight that met his eyes as he rounded the bend on his stallion. There, caught in the swirling waters, a woman with long auburn hair was fighting for her life, one arm wrapped protectively around what appeared to be a small child. Without hesitation, Zach spurred his horse along the bank, keeping pace with the current while searching for the best intervention point. The woman's face was a mask of determination despite her obvious fatigue. He could see her lips moving prayers perhaps, or reassurances to the infant. Either way, Zach knew he had precious little time. "Hold on, madam," he shouted above the roar. "I'm coming for you." Her eyes found his green as summer grass, wide with both hope and fear. She nodded once, summoning strength from somewhere deep within. Zach dismounted quickly, securing his horse to a sturdy cottonwood before removing his boots and gun belt. The water would be frigid from the mountain runoff, but there was no time to consider discomfort. He waded in at a diagonal, fighting the pull of the current while calculating the woman's trajectory. "When I reach you," he called, "give me the baby first." Vanessa nodded again, though her face betrayed her reluctance to release her child even for a moment. The rapids were dragging her downstream with increasing speed, and rocks jutted dangerously from the frothing water ahead. Zach plunged deeper, the water now at his chest. The cold stole his breath, but he pressed forward, angling himself to intercept the woman's path. He had only one chance to get this right. "Trust me," he said as he reached for her. "I won't let anything happen to either of you." Their hands connected, his grip solid around her wrist. For the first time since the disaster began, Vanessa felt something besides terror, a flicker of hope. "My daughter," she gasped, her voice barely audible above the water's roar. Zach carefully took the small bundle, noting the infant couldn't be more than a few months old. With practiced movements, he tucked the baby inside his shirt, securing her against his chest with one arm while maintaining his grip on Vanessa with the other. "I've got her. Now let's get you out." The struggle back to shore was grueling. The current fought them at every turn, and twice Vanessa nearly slipped from his grasp. But Zach's determination matched her own, and inch by painful inch, they made their way to safer waters. When his boots finally touched the gravel of the shallows, Zach nearly collapsed with relief. He helped Vanessa to her feet, her sodden dress weighing her down like armor. The baby, miraculously, had stopped crying and was blinking up at him with curious blue eyes. "You're safe now," he said, returning the child to her mother's trembling arms. Vanessa clutched her daughter to her chest, tears mingling with the river water on her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved our lives." Zach offered a humble nod, his own breathing still ragged from exertion. "What's your name, madam?" Vanessa Keller." She adjusted the blanket around her daughter's face. "And this is Emma." "Zachary Xavier," he replied with a slight tip of his dripping hat. "Most folks just call me Zach." A violent shiver ran through Vanessa's body, reminding them both of their precarious situation. They were soaking wet in spring air that, while warm during the day, would turn dangerously cold with nightfall. "My camp is not far," Zach said, leading his horse back to them. "We need to get you both warm and dry." Vanessa looked down the riverbank in the direction her carriage had been swept away, containing all her worldly possessions. Her face fell as the reality of her situation became clear. "I've lost everything," she murmured. "Not everything," Zach replied softly, nodding toward the child in her arms. "May I help you up?" After settling Vanessa and Emma on his horse, Zach walked alongside, leading them to his modest camp nestled in a grove of cottonwoods. He worked quickly to build up the fire while Vanessa huddled nearby, still shivering despite the blanket he'd wrapped around her shoulders. "I've got some spare clothes in my pack," he said, avoiding looking directly at her out of respect. "They'll be too big, but they're dry." "Thank you, Mr. Xavier. Just Zach, please." He handed her a faded flannel shirt and canvas pants. "You can change behind those trees, I'll see to Emma." Vanessa hesitated, maternal instinct warring with practicality. "I raised 3 younger sisters," Zach assured her. "I know my way around babies." She nodded gratefully and disappeared behind the trees with the clothing. When she emerged moments later, the oversized garments hung comically on her slender frame, but she looked warmer already. Her long auburn hair had been wrung out and hung down her back in damp waves. True to his word, Zach had managed to change Emma into a makeshift diaper fashioned from a clean bandana and had wrapped her in his spare shirt. The baby cooed contentedly in his large, calloused hands. "She seems to like you," Vanessa said, reclaiming her daughter. "Babies and horses," Zach replied with a small smile. "They're the only ones who consistently approve of my company." As the evening deepened around them, Zach prepared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee. Vanessa accepted the tin plate gratefully, balancing Emma in one arm while she ate. "What brings you out here alone, Mrs. Keller?" Zach asked eventually, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Miss," she corrected softly, "and I'm not truly alone, I have Emma." Zach nodded, waiting for her to continue if she wished. "I was heading to Douglas," she finally said. "My cousin lives there after Emma's father." She trailed off, her expression clouding. "Well, let's just say he decided fatherhood wasn't for him." Zach's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Douglas is still about 3 days' ride from here." "I know," Vanessa sighed, looking down at her daughter. "I thought I had prepared well enough for the journey, but the storm came so suddenly, and the river." "No one could have predicted the flash flood," Zach assured her. "Even experienced travelers get caught sometimes. You seem to know this land well." "I've been wandering it for nearly 10 years now," he admitted. "Started on cattle drives when I was barely 18, then tried my hand at mining, hunting, and guiding. These days I mostly break horses for ranchers and the occasional cavalry unit." "Is that what you're doing now, breaking horses?" Zach shook his head. "Just finished a job at the Fletcher Ranch north of here. Was tracking some Mustangs when I heard you, thought I might capture a few to train." Vanessa studied him across the fire, noting the quiet confidence in his weathered features. He wasn't classically handsome, his nose had clearly been broken at least once, and a thin scar ran along his jawline, but there was something compelling about his steady blue eyes and the gentle way he moved, belying his obvious strength. "What will you do now?" he asked, interrupting her thoughts. Reality crashed back over Vanessa like the river's current. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything I had was in that carriage, my clothes, money, the letter from my cousin." "I can take you to Douglas," Zach offered without hesitation. "Once you're with your family, you can start fresh." Hope flickered in Vanessa's eyes. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Out here, folks help each other," he replied simply. "Besides, I've got no pressing engagements, and Douglas is as good a direction as any." As Emma began to fuss, Vanessa adjusted her position to nurse her discreetly beneath the blanket. Zach busied himself with the fire, affording her privacy. "Does your cousin know you're coming?" he asked after a while. "Yes, I sent a letter ahead last month." "Martha is expecting us sometime this week." A shadow crossed Vanessa's face. "She doesn't know about Emma's father leaving. I wrote that he died in an accident." Zach nodded, understanding the social realities for a single mother. "Then that's the story we'll maintain." "For the journey," he clarified. "If anyone asks, we can say I'm escorting a widow and her child to family in Douglas." Relief washed over Vanessa's features. "Thank you for everything." As night fully descended, Zach arranged his bedroll for Vanessa and Emma, insisting he was comfortable enough with his saddle for a pillow and his duster as a blanket. "Get some rest, Miss Keller. We have a long ride ahead tomorrow." Vanessa settled into the bedroll, Emma nestled securely against her. Despite the trauma of the day, sleep found her quickly, her body exhausted from the ordeal. Zach remained awake longer, watching the fire's embers and listening to the soft breathing of the woman and child under his protection. He was no stranger to solitude, had even come to prefer it over the years, but there was something about Vanessa Keller's quiet strength that intrigued him. She had fought the river with everything she had, not for herself, but for her daughter. As stars wheeled overhead in the vast Arizona sky, Zach Xavier made a silent promise to see them safely to Douglas. Whatever challenges the journey might bring, morning came with the gentle cooing of Emma, who woke before her mother. Zach was already up, tending to his horse and preparing a simple breakfast of leftover biscuits and coffee. "Good morning," Vanessa said, emerging from the bedroll with Emma in her arms. Her hair, now dry, caught the early sunlight like burnished copper. "Morning," Zach replied, offering her a cup of coffee. "Hope you slept well enough. Better than I had any right to, considering yesterday." She accepted the coffee gratefully. "Emma usually wakes several times in the night, but she slept straight through." "Must have been exhausted from her adventure," Zach said, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny fist. Emma immediately grabbed his finger, her grip surprisingly strong. "She's a fighter like her mama." Vanessa smiled, the first genuine smile Zach had seen from her. It transformed her face, softening the worry lines around her eyes and revealing a dimple in her left cheek. "We'll need to figure something for her to wear," she said, looking down at the makeshift garments Zach had fashioned. "And I can't keep wearing your clothes." "There's a trading post about half a day's ride from here," Zach replied. "We can get what you need there." After a quick breakfast, they broke camp efficiently. Zach fashioned a sling for Emma from a spare shirt, allowing Vanessa to carry her securely while riding. He helped them both onto his horse before mounting behind them. "Is this arrangement acceptable?" he asked, conscious of their proximity. "It's necessary," Vanessa replied practically, though Zach noticed a slight flush on her cheeks. They rode steadily through the morning, following game trails that paralleled the now calmer river. Emma dozed in her improvised sling, lulled by the horse's rhythmic motion. Zach was acutely aware of Vanessa seated before him, her back occasionally brushing against his chest when the trail dipped or rose. "Tell me about your cousin in Douglas," he prompted, hoping conversation would ease the awkwardness of their forced intimacy. "Martha is my mother's cousin, actually. She married a man named Franklin Bell who owns the mercantile there. They have no children of their own, so when I wrote about bringing Emma, she was quite enthusiastic." "You've never been to Douglas before," Vanessa shook her head slightly. "I grew up in St. Louis. After my parents died of influenza 5 years ago, I worked as a governess for a wealthy family. That's where I met Emma's father." Her voice took on a harder edge. "He was the eldest son. When I told him about the baby, he offered to set me up in a house outside of town." "But not to marry you," Zach guessed quietly. "He was already engaged to a banker's daughter. The arrangement was not what I wanted for my child." She straightened her shoulders. "So I wrote to Martha, saved what I could, and left before the family could suggest more permanent solutions to hide their son's indiscretion." Zach's respect for her grew with each word. Many women would have accepted the kept position for security's sake, but Vanessa had chosen a harder path for the sake of dignity. "Your daughter is fortunate to have such a mother," he said simply. They reached the trading post by early afternoon. It was a modest establishment, little more than a large cabin with a corral and stable attached, but it served as a vital connection point for travelers, ranchers, and the scattered homesteaders in the region. "Wait here," Zach said as he helped Vanessa dismount. "Let me make sure it's safe." The caution in his voice reminded Vanessa that despite his kindness, Zach Xavier was a man accustomed to the dangers of frontier life. She watched as he approached the trading post, his right hand casually resting near the revolver at his hip. The door opened before he reached it, revealing a portly man with a gray beard and suspicious eyes. The two men exchanged words Vanessa couldn't hear, then the older man's face split into a wide grin. He clapped Zach on the shoulder and waved toward Vanessa. "Come on over, madam," Zach called. "Old Joe here is harmless despite appearances. Speak for yourself, Xavier," the man retorted good-naturedly. "My wife might disagree about the harmless part." His eyes softened when he saw Emma. "Well now, who do we have here?" "This is Miss Vanessa Keller and her daughter Emma," Zach introduced. "They had some trouble at the river crossing yesterday, lost all their belongings." Understanding dawned in Joe's weathered face. "River's been a terror this spring, claimed 2 wagons already that I know of." He turned to Vanessa with a courtly bow that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. "Joseph Delaney at your service, madam. My wife Betsy is inside and will be mighty pleased to see another woman. Been just the 2 of us out here since our boys grew up and moved on." The inside of the trading post was surprisingly tidy, with goods arranged on shelves and tables with obvious care. A small woman with silver-streaked black hair looked up from her mending as they entered, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with one comprehensive glance. "Zachary Xavier," she said with a hint of a southern accent, "what trouble have you brought to my doorstep this time?" "Good to see you too, Mrs. Delaney," Zach replied with a grin. "Miss Keller here could use some assistance. River took her carriage yesterday." Betsy Delaney's expression immediately softened. "You poor dear, and with a little one too," she bustled forward, already assessing. "Joe, put some coffee on. Miss Keller looks like she could use something warm." Within minutes, Vanessa found herself seated at the Delaney's table in the back room of the post, a cup of strong coffee in her hands, and Emma being expertly bounced on Betsy's knee. The older woman had produced a trunk of clothing left by folks who couldn't pay their bills or pass through and never returned, and insisted Vanessa take what she needed. "These should fit you well enough," Betsy said, holding up a serviceable brown skirt and white blouse. "And I've got some baby things too. Our youngest granddaughter visited last summer and they left behind more than they took." Zach had discreetly retreated to the trading post's main room with Joe, giving Vanessa privacy to change and feed Emma. "That's a good man out there," Betsy commented as she helped Vanessa fasten the buttons on the blouse. "Known Zach Xavier for, 7 years now, never seen him take to anyone the way he seems to have taken to you and your little girl." Vanessa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He's been very kind. I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't come along when he did." Betsy gave her a knowing look but said nothing more on the subject. "Joe says there's been trouble up toward Douglas lately, renegade Apache causing problems for travelers." Vanessa's stomach tightened with anxiety. "Mr. Xavier mentioned nothing about this. Probably didn't want to worry you," Betsy replied, testing the temperature of a bottle of goat's milk she'd prepared for Emma. "But you should know. The Army sent a patrol through last week, said they were tracking a small band that broke away from the reservation. Nothing too serious yet, mostly stealing horses and supplies, but travelers should be cautious." When they rejoined the men, Vanessa noted the serious expression on Zach's face as he and Joe bent over a crude map spread on the counter. They straightened as the women entered, and Zach's eyes widened slightly at the transformation. The borrowed clothes fit Vanessa much better than his own had, emphasizing her slender waist and the gentle curves that motherhood had enhanced. "Mrs. Delaney has been most generous," Vanessa said, adjusting Emma in her arms. The baby now wore a soft cotton gown and was wrapped in a proper blanket. "We'll pay for everything," Zach added quickly. Joe waved a dismissive hand. "Consider it trail hospitality. Besides, that mare you sold me last year has more than earned her keep. Foaled the prettiest little colt I've seen in an age." "At least let me offer something in return," Vanessa insisted. "I'm handy with a needle. Perhaps I could mend some things while we're here." Betsy's eyes lit up. "Well, if you're offering, I do have a stack of Joe's shirts that need attention. Man tears through clothing like it grows on trees." The arrangement settled, Zach helped Joe with some repairs to the corral while Vanessa sat at the Delaney's table, skillfully mending tiers and replacing buttons. Emma slept peacefully in a basket Betsy had lined with soft cloths. The domestic scene stirred something in Vanessa she hadn't felt since before her parents' deaths, a sense of belonging, of usefulness beyond mere survival. As evening approached, Betsy insisted they stay the night. The back room has a spare bed, and it's foolish to start out with just a few hours of daylight left. Zach agreed, though Vanessa caught him glancing repeatedly toward the north, where Douglas lay. Whatever Joe had told him had clearly intensified his concern about their journey. After a hearty dinner of venison stew and cornbread, Joe brought out a fiddle and filled the small room with lively tunes. Betsy pulled her reluctant husband into a spirited dance, their familiarity with each other's movements speaking of decades together. Care to join them? Zach asked, surprising Vanessa with his extended hand. I haven't danced since. She trailed off, memories of the last ball she'd attended in St. Louis surfacing the night Emma's father had first shown interest in her. Then you're long overdue, Zach said gently. Just follow my lead. His hand was warm and calloused against hers as he drew her into a simple two-step. Zach moved with unexpected grace for such a tall man, guiding Vanessa with subtle pressure at the small of her back. She found herself relaxing into the rhythm, even laughing when he executed a playful turn that sent her skirts swirling. Where did a cowboy learn to dance like this? She asked, breathless from both exertion and proximity. My mother insisted all her sons learn, he replied, a fond smile softening his features. Said no son of hers would be a complete savage, regardless of where we ended up. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. The past tense hung between them momentarily. Influenza took both my parents in '73. My sisters went to an aunt in California. I chose a different path. The music shifted to a slower tune, and their dance naturally adjusted. Vanessa was acutely aware of Zach's hand at her waist, the respectful distance he maintained even as they moved together. Thank you, she said softly, meeting his gaze. For the dance, for seeing me as more than just someone to be rescued, for treating me like. She hesitated, searching for the right words. Like the strong, capable woman you are, Zach suggested. Vanessa nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. No one had seen her that way since her parents died, not her employers, certainly not Emma's father. To them, she had been either a servant or an inconvenient problem to be managed. Emma's cry from her basket broke the moment. Vanessa stepped away, her face flushed, and hurried to attend to her daughter. As she lifted the baby, she glanced back to find Zach watching her, something unreadable in his expression. Later, as Vanessa settled into the narrow bed in the back room with Emma beside her, she found her thoughts returning to the dance, to the steady presence of Zachary Xavier and the unexpected comfort she found in his company. It was foolish to dwell on such feelings, she told herself firmly. In a few days, they would reach Douglas, and he would continue his wandering life while she built something stable for Emma. Yet, as sleep claimed her, it was the memory of his blue eyes that followed her into dreams. Zach spent a restless night on a pallet in the trading post's main room, his mind cycling between concern about the reported Apache activity and the memory of Vanessa in his arms during their dance. By morning, he had made several decisions about their journey to Douglas. We'll need to avoid the main trail, he told Joe as they shared coffee before the women woke. If there's trouble, that's where it will find us. Joe nodded agreement. The old mining road follows the foothills, longer route but more cover, fewer places for ambush. I'll need some extra supplies, ammunition, more food. Planning for trouble? Joe asked shrewdly. Zach's jaw tightened. Planning to avoid it, but if it finds us anyway, I aim to be ready. When Vanessa emerged with a freshly changed Emma, Zach explained the change in plans. It will take an extra day to reach Douglas, but the route is safer. Because of the Apache? Vanessa asked directly. Zach shot a questioning look at Betsy, who shrugged unapologetically. She deserved to know, the older woman said. Yes, Zach admitted, there's been some activity. Probably nothing to worry about, but I prefer caution. Vanessa adjusted Emma in her arms. I trust your judgment, Mr. Xavier. You haven't led us astray yet. They departed mid-morning after many thanks and promises to visit on their return journey, a suggestion that made Vanessa wonder if Zach intended to accompany her back from Douglas once her business there was concluded. The thought stirred a complicated mix of emotions she wasn't ready to examine. The old mining road was indeed less traveled, barely more than a track winding through scrubby foothills east of the main trail. Zach rode more vigilantly than before, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. They spoke little during the morning, the tension of potential danger keeping conversation at bay. By midday, however, Emma's cheerful babbling had lightened the mood. They stopped in a sheltered hollow to rest and eat, spreading a blanket in the shade of a gnarled juniper. Emma, now dressed in a proper gown and booties thanks to Betsy's generosity, practiced rolling from back to front while Vanessa prepared a simple meal from their supplies. "She's growing strong," Zach observed, watching as Emma managed to flip herself over, her face registering surprise at her own accomplishment. "Too quickly," Vanessa replied with a wistful smile. "She'll be crawling before we know it." "How old is she now?" 5 months next week." Vanessa's expression softened as she gazed at her daughter. "Sometimes I can hardly believe she's real, that something so perfect could come from." She stopped herself, unwilling to speak ill of Emma's father despite everything. "Life has a way of giving gifts wrapped in unexpected packages," Zach said. He reached out to Emma, who immediately grabbed his finger with her characteristic grip. "My mother used to say that God's greatest blessings often come disguised as challenges." "Your mother sounds wiser by the minute," Vanessa said. "What else did she teach you besides dancing?" Zach's laugh was warm and genuine. "To read and cipher, to treat animals with kindness but firmness, to never make promises I couldn't keep." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "And to recognize a good woman when I found one, because they're rarer than gold in these parts." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Vanessa busied herself with repacking their food, using the activity to hide the color she felt rising to her cheeks. "We should keep moving," she said finally. "If we want to make good distance before nightfall." Zach nodded, helping her gather their things and secure Emma in her sling. As he assisted Vanessa onto the horse, their hands met briefly, the contact sending an unexpected warmth through her fingers. They rode through the afternoon in companionable silence, broken occasionally by Emma's contented noises or Zach's quiet observations about the land. The trail grew steeper as they ascended into rockier terrain, the horse picking its way carefully along the narrow path. "We'll camp up ahead," Zach said as the sun began its descent. "There's a good spot I remember from a previous journey, sheltered with access to water." The site proved to be a small box canyon with a trickling spring forming a clear pool at its center. Cottonwood trees provided both shade and firewood, and the canyon's walls offered protection from the wind. As Zach tended to the horse, Vanessa explored their surroundings with Emma. The spring-fed pool was shallow and sun warmed at its edges. "Oh, Emma would love a proper bath," she said, testing the water with her fingers. "And truthfully, so would I." Zach cleared his throat. "I can, make myself scarce for a bit, gather more firewood up the canyon, give you privacy." Vanessa smiled at his discomfort. "That would be appreciated." "Thank you." Once Zach had disappeared around a bend in the canyon, Vanessa quickly undressed Emma and dipped her gently into the shallow edge of the pool. The baby squealed with delight, splashing with enthusiastic fists. "You like that, don't you?" Vanessa laughed, supporting Emma's head while letting her experience the sensation of floating. "Such a brave girl after your adventure in the big river." After Emma was clean and wrapped in a fresh cloth, Vanessa hesitated only briefly before stripping off her own clothes and slipping into the deeper part of the pool. The water was bracingly cool but refreshing after days of travel. She kept one eye on Emma, who was contentedly examining a large cottonwood leaf on the blanket, while she quickly scrubbed herself with a sliver of soap Betsy had provided. The sound of approaching footsteps sent her ducking deeper into the water, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "Miss Keller," Zach called from a distance. "Is it safe to return?" "Not quite," she called back, scrambling out of the pool and hastily drying herself with a cloth before donning her clothes again. Her hair hung in wet tendrils down her back, soaking the back of her blouse. "All right, you can come back now." Zach appeared, arms laden with firewood, his eyes carefully averted until he was sure she was decent. "Found plenty of deadfall," he said, setting down his burden. "Should keep us warm tonight." "The water is wonderful," Vanessa said, wringing out her hair. "You should take advantage before dark." Something flashed in Zach's eyes, appreciation, perhaps, at the domestic scene before him. Vanessa with her wet hair and freshly scrubbed face, Emma cooing on the blanket. For a moment, they might have been any frontier family making their home in the wilderness. "I believe I will," he said finally. "Would you mind turning the horse loose in the canyon to graze? There's no way out except the way we came in." While Zach took his turn at the pool, Vanessa prepared a simple meal and settled Emma for nursing. The baby was drowsy after her bath, eyelids drooping even as she suckled. By the time Zach returned, hair damp and shirt clinging slightly to his still wet skin, Emma was sound asleep on the blanket. "She's out early tonight," he observed, crouching to build the fire. "Bath always makes her sleepy," Vanessa replied, watching his efficient movements. "Do all cowboys know how to make a fire with such little smoke?" "Only the ones who have had reason to avoid being seen," Zach said with a wry smile. "I spent some time in Comanche territory a few years back, learned quickly that a big fire is an invitation to unwanted company." As darkness settled over the canyon, they ate their meal in the fire's warm glow. Zach shared stories of his travels, cattle drives through raging rivers, encounters with grizzlies in Montana, a winter spent snowbound in a lined shack with 3 other cowboys and only beans and coffee for sustenance. "What about you?" he asked eventually. "What brought you west from St. Louis?" "Besides the obvious situation," he added, nodding toward Emma. Vanessa considered the question. "I think I was looking for a fresh start even before Emma. After my parents died, the city held too many memories. Being a governess was respectable work, but I was always an outsider in someone else's home." She gazed into the fire. "When I wrote to Martha about my predicament, her response was so warm, so welcoming. The idea of belonging somewhere again was irresistible, and Douglas will be that place." "I hope so." "Martha wrote that they could use help in the mercantile, that there's a small house behind the store where Emma and I could live." She looked up at him. "It's not grand, but it's a chance to build something that's ours." Zach nodded slowly. "It's a good town, growing but still decent. The people look out for each other." "You know it well." "Passed through several times," he replied. "Worked at the livery there one winter when I was younger." Vanessa studied his face in the firelight, noting the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar along his jaw. "Have you never wanted to settle somewhere, Mr. Xavier, to have a place to call your own?" He was quiet for so long that Vanessa thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice held a note she hadn't heard before, something almost wistful. "There was a time I thought about it. Had a bit of land staked out near the Colorado border, even started building a cabin." He prodded the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Then the war came. By the time I returned 4 years later, someone else had claimed it. Seemed like a sign that I wasn't meant for that life." "The war changed many things for many people," Vanessa said softly. Zach's eyes met hers across the fire. "What about you, Miss Keller? Is a mercantile in Douglas truly all you want from life?" The directness of his question took Vanessa aback. She glanced at Emma, sleeping peacefully nearby. "I want security for my daughter," she said finally. "I want her to grow up knowing she's loved, that she belongs somewhere. She hesitated, then continued more quietly. "I want her to have the family I lost." "A worthy goal," Zach agreed. "And for yourself," Vanessa smiled sadly. "I stopped thinking about what I wanted for myself some time ago, Mr. Xavier." "Zach," he corrected gently. "After all we've been through, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Zach," she repeated, the single syllable feeling strangely intimate on her tongue. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, Zach rose and arranged their bedrolls, Vanessa's near Emma, his own on the opposite side of the fire. "We should try to reach the foothills beyond the old mining camp tomorrow," he said. "From there, it's less than a day to Douglas." Vanessa nodded, suddenly aware that their journey was nearing its end. The realization brought a strange heaviness to her heart. "Good night, Zach," she said, settling beside Emma. "Good night, Vanessa," he replied, his voice low in the darkness. She lay awake for some time, listening to the night sounds of the canyon and Zach's steady breathing across the fire. When sleep finally came, she dreamed of rivers and strong hands pulling her to safety. Morning brought a subtle shift in the weather, with clouds gathering on the western horizon. Zach eyed them thoughtfully as they broke camp. "Looks like rain later," he observed. "We should try to reach the old mining camp before it hits." They made good time through the morning, the trail widening as it joined an abandoned wagon road. Evidence of earlier mining operations appeared: occasionally collapsed tunnels, rusted equipment, the skeletal remains of cabins reclaimed by nature. "Silver boom came through here in the 60s, Zach explained. "Played out quickly, but not before they built this road. Makes our journey easier, at least." By midday, the clouds had thickened, and a cool wind picked up, carrying the unmistakable scent of approaching rain. Emma, sensitive to the changing pressure, grew fussy in her sling. "There's an intact cabin just ahead," Zach said as fat raindrops began to spatter around them. "Used to be the assayer's office, should give us shelter until this passes." The cabin appeared around the next bend, a sturdy structure of logs and stone that had weathered the years better than its neighbors. Zach dismounted quickly and helped Vanessa and Emma down, ushering them inside as the rain began in earnest. The interior was dusty but sound, with a small stone fireplace and crude furnishings left behind by the previous occupants. Zach quickly started a fire to chase away the dampness, while Vanessa settled Emma on a blanket spread over the rough plank floor. "Could be worse accommodations," Zach said, glancing around. "I've certainly slept in less comfortable places." Vanessa brushed dust from a three-legged stool before sitting. "How long do you think the storm will last?" "Hard to say. These spring storms can blow through quickly or settle in for days." He moved to the single window, where rain now streamed down the cloudy glass. "We have enough supplies for a day or two if needed." The prospect of being confined in the small cabin with Zach sent an unexpected flutter through Vanessa's stomach. Over their days of travel, she had grown increasingly aware of him not just as her rescuer, but as a man: his quiet strength, his gentle way with Emma, the respectful distance he maintained even as a certain warmth grew between them. As if sensing her thoughts, Zach turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "I should check on the horse," he said abruptly, and disappeared outside into the downpour. Left alone, Vanessa attended to Emma, who had begun to cry in earnest. The baby was hungry and overwhelmed by the strange surroundings and the sound of rain hammering on the cabin's roof. "SHH, sweet girl," Vanessa murmured, unbuttoning her blouse to nurse. "Everything is all right, we're safe and dry." By the time Zach returned, dripping wet but satisfied that the horse was securely sheltered in a lean-to behind the cabin, Emma had finished nursing and was happily examining her own fingers. Vanessa had found a relatively clean corner and arranged their bedrolls there. "You're soaked through," she observed as Zach removed his hat and duster, water pooling at his feet. "Occupational hazard," he replied with a shrug. "Fire feels good, though." Vanessa hesitated, then said, "You should change into dry clothes. I can look away." Zach's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Thank you," he said simply, reaching for his saddlebags. Vanessa occupied herself with Emma, keeping her back turned as she heard the rustle of fabric behind her. The awareness of Zach changing just a few feet away sent heat to her cheeks despite the chill in the cabin. "Decent now," he announced after a moment. When Vanessa turned, she found him in a clean flannel shirt, hanging his wet clothes near the fire to dry. His hair was tousled from toweling, giving him a boyish appearance at odds with his weathered face. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the cabin and wind howling through the abandoned mining camp. Thunder rolled in the distance, drawing closer with each peal. "Looks like we're here for the duration," Zach said, settling cross-legged near the fire. "Might as well make ourselves comfortable." As the afternoon wore on, they shared the last of Betsy's cornbread and some dried apples. Emma, initially startled by each thunderclap, gradually grew accustomed to the sound and even seemed to watch the flashes of lightning through the window with interest. "She's remarkably adaptable," Zach commented, watching as the baby reached toward the window at a particularly bright flash. "Children often are," Vanessa replied. "More so than adults, I think. They haven't yet learned to fear change." "Is that what you think adults fear most? Change?" Vanessa considered the question. "Perhaps not all adults. But many become comfortable in their circumstances, even unhappy ones, because the unknown seems more frightening." "And you?" Zach asked, his eyes intent on her face. "Do you fear change, Vanessa?" The use of her first name sent a small shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cabin's lingering chill. "I used to," she admitted. "But then change found me anyway in the form of Emma. Now I'm learning to embrace it." Zach nodded slowly. "Life has a way of taking us down unexpected trails. Like rivers that sweep us away," Vanessa said softly. "Or lead us to exactly where we need to be," he countered, holding her gaze. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something Vanessa hadn't felt in a long time, possibility, perhaps, or desire. She looked away first, suddenly very interested in adjusting Emma's blanket. As evening approached, the storm showed no signs of abating. Zach prepared a simple stew from their provisions, the savory aroma filling the small cabin and creating an atmosphere of unexpected domesticity. They ate together near the fire, the howling wind outside making their shelter seem all the more precious. Emma had fallen asleep, exhausted from the day's excitement, leaving Vanessa and Zach to talk quietly over their meal. "Tell me about your sisters," Vanessa prompted, curious about the family that had shaped him. Zach's face softened with obvious affection. "Rebecca is the oldest, just 2 years younger than me, smart as a whip and twice as sharp-tongued. Then there's Mary, the peacemaker of the family, and Sarah, the youngest. She was just 14 when our parents died." "Do you see them often?" He shook his head regretfully. "Not as much as I should. They're all in California now. Rebecca married a lawyer in San Francisco. Mary and Sarah live nearby. I try to visit every couple of years. They must miss you." "They've built good lives there," Zach said. "Rebecca has 3 children now. Mary teaches school. Sarah." He smiled faintly. "Sarah writes me letters full of adventure stories she makes up, says someday she'll publish them and make her fortune." "You miss them," Vanessa observed. "Every day," he admitted, "but the wandering life suits me, or it has until now." The last words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Vanessa found herself unable to look away from Zach's face, from the sincerity in his blue eyes. "What's changed?" she asked softly, though some part of her already knew the answer. Zach seemed about to reply when a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the cabin's door, startling them both. The momentary distraction broke whatever spell had been forming, and Zach rose to check that their shelter remained secure. "Doors holding," he reported, returning to the fire. "But this storm isn't letting up anytime soon. We should try to get some sleep. Tomorrow may be a long day if we have to travel in mud." Vanessa nodded, disappointed at the interruption yet also relieved. Whatever Zach had been about to say, she wasn't certain she was ready to hear it, or to examine her own growing feelings for this quiet, honorable man who had saved her life, and continued to protect her and Emma with such steadfast devotion. They settled into their respective bedrolls, the fire between them casting flickering shadows on the cabin walls. Outside, rain continued to drum on the roof, punctuated by occasional thunder. "Good night, Vanessa," Zach said from across the fire. "Good night, Zach," she replied, cradling Emma close against the night's chill. Despite her physical exhaustion, sleep eluded Vanessa. Her mind returned repeatedly to the unfinished conversation, to the way Zach had looked at her across the fire, to the growing awareness that their journey's end would mean parting ways. The thought brought an unexpected ache to her chest. Across the fire, she could tell from his breathing that Zach was equally awake, perhaps wrestling with similar thoughts. The storm outside matched the tumult in her heart, powerful, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. Dawn broke with lingering rain, though the worst of the storm had passed during the night. Vanessa woke to find Zach already up, tending the fire and preparing coffee. Emma remained asleep, her small face peaceful in the early light. "Morning," Zach said quietly, offering Vanessa a steaming cup. "Looks like we'll have wet trails today, but at least the thunder's moved on." "Thank you," she replied, accepting the coffee. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, the brief contact sending warmth through her that had nothing to do with the hot drink. "I checked the horse," Zach continued, moving back to his side of the fire. "He's fine, though not thrilled about the weather. We can wait a bit longer if you'd like, see if the rain stops completely." Vanessa nodded, sipping her coffee while watching him prepare a simple breakfast of jerky and hardtack. There was a comfortable familiarity to their morning routine now, developed over days of travel together. The thought that it would soon end left her feeling strangely bereft. "How far to Douglas from here?" she asked, disturbing the comfortable silence. "If the trails aren't too muddy, we could make it by late afternoon," Zach replied, his expression carefully neutral. "Your cousin will be relieved to see you safe." "Yes," Vanessa agreed, though with less enthusiasm than the word warranted. "I suppose she's been worried, especially if news of the flooding has reached town." As they ate breakfast, Emma woke and demanded immediate attention. Vanessa changed and fed her while Zach packed their belongings, preparing for the day's journey. The domesticity of the scene struck Vanessa suddenly how natural it felt to share these morning tasks, to move around each other in the small cabin with easy familiarity. By mid-morning, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and they decided to continue their journey. The trails were muddy but passable, their progress slower than previous days but steady. Emma, secured in her sling against Vanessa's chest, seemed content to watch the glistening landscape pass by, occasionally reaching out toward raindrops on leaves or flowers freshly opened after the storm. They spoke little as they rode, each lost in thoughts of their impending arrival in Douglas. The weight of unspoken words hung between them, growing heavier with each passing mile. At midday, they stopped to rest in a small clearing where sunlight had begun to break through the clouds. While Vanessa tended to Emma, Zach disappeared briefly into the surrounding brush, returning with a handful of wild strawberries. "Not many, but they're sweet," he said, offering them to Vanessa. "The rain brings them out." She accepted the small gift with a smile, the simple kindness touching her deeply. "You're always thinking of others, aren't you?" Zach shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "Just seems natural to share what you find along the trail. Is that one of your mother's lessons, too?" "That one came from my father, actually," he replied, sitting beside her on a fallen log. "He believed that a man's worth wasn't measured by what he accumulated, but by what he was willing to give away." "Your parents sound like remarkable people," Vanessa said. "They raised a good man." Zach's eyes met hers, something vulnerable in their blue depths. "I've tried to live by their teachings, though I've stumbled plenty along the way." "Haven't we all?" Vanessa murmured, glancing down at Emma, who was contentedly exploring the texture of the blanket beneath her. "I sometimes wonder what my parents would think of the choices I've made, if they would understand why I couldn't simply accept what Emma's father offered." "They would be proud," Zach said without hesitation. "It takes courage to choose a harder path for the right reasons." His certainty warmed Vanessa, affirming decisions that had often left her questioning herself in the lonely hours of the night. "Thank you for saying that." As they continued their journey through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changed. The mining country gave way to rolling hills dotted with cattle, and occasional homesteads appeared in the distance. Signs of civilization grew more frequent: fenced pastures, a distant church spire, wagon tracks freshened by recent travel. "We're getting close," Zach said as they crested a rise in the trail. He pointed toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley ahead. "That's Douglas." Vanessa's heart quickened at the sight. After weeks of travel and the harrowing river incident, her destination was finally in view. Yet instead of pure relief, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: anticipation of reunion with her cousin, anxiety about starting this new chapter of her life. and a deep reluctance to part from the man who had become so important to her in such a short time. "What will you do after you deliver us safely?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Zach was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the distant town. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," he admitted finally. "There's usually work to be found for a man who knows horses. In Douglas." He glanced back at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Perhaps, or further on, the territory's full of opportunities for those willing to look." Disappointment settled in Vanessa's chest, though she tried to hide it. What had she expected? That this wandering cowboy would suddenly abandon his free-roaming life for a woman he'd known less than a week and a child not his own. "Of course," she said, forcing brightness into her tone. "And Martha will be so pleased to see Emma. In her letters, she mentioned how much she's looking forward to having a child in the house again." They rode down into the valley, the town growing larger as they approached. Douglas was bigger than Vanessa had imagined, several streets of substantial buildings, a proper church with a steeple, and businesses that spoke of prosperity. A hotel, bank, and what appeared to be several saloons in addition to the expected mercantile and livery. People turned to look as they rode down the main street, curious about the newcomers. Vanessa was acutely aware of their appearance after days on the trail, though Betsy's clothes had held up well through the journey. "The mercantile should be near the center of town," Zach said, guiding the horse past curious onlookers. "Bell's Mercantile, if I remember correctly." They found it easily enough, a large 2-story building with a wide porch and windows displaying an assortment of goods. A sign above the door proclaimed Bell's Dry Goods and Mercantile in bold letters. Behind the store, Vanessa could see a modest house, presumably where Martha and her husband lived. As they dismounted, the store's door opened, and a plump woman with graying brown hair hurried out, her eyes widening at the sight of them. Vanessa Keller, is that you?" she called, rushing down the steps. "Martha," Vanessa confirmed, emotions suddenly tightening her throat. "Yes, it's me." Martha Bell enveloped her in a warm embrace, mindful of Emma between them. "Oh, my dear girl, we've been so worried when news came about the flooding and you didn't arrive when expected." She pulled back, examining Vanessa's face. "But here you are, safe and sound, thank the Lord. And this must be little Emma." As Martha fussed over the baby, Vanessa turned to introduce Zach, only to find him standing a respectful distance away, hat in hands, an expression of quiet resignation on his face. "Martha, this is Mr. Zachary Xavier," she said, her voice softening. "He saved our lives when the river took my carriage. Without him, Emma and I wouldn't be here." Martha turned her attention to Zach, eyes filling with grateful tears. "Mr. Xavier, I can't begin to thank you enough. To think what might have happened." "Anyone would have done the same, madam," Zach replied with characteristic modesty. "Miss Keller did the hard part, keeping herself and Emma afloat until I reached them." "Nonsense," Martha declared. "You're a hero, sir, and we won't hear otherwise. Franklin." She called toward the store. "Franklin, come out here and meet the man who saved our Vanessa." A tall, thin man with spectacles and a neat beard appeared in the doorway. "What's all this commotion, Martha? I have customers." He stopped short at the sight of the group on his porch. "Well, I'll be." "Is this our Vanessa at last?" Introductions were made again, with Franklin Bell expressing the same effusive gratitude as his wife. Vanessa watched Zach's growing discomfort with the praise, knowing how little he cared for such attention. "Please, you must both come in," Martha insisted. "You look exhausted from your journey. Franklin, close the store early. Family is more important than business today." "That's not necessary, madam," Zach began, but Martha would hear no objections. "I won't take no for an answer, Mr. Xavier. Not from the man who saved our Vanessa and little Emma." Before Zach could protest further, they were ushered into the house behind the store, a comfortable home filled with substantial furniture and the warm smells of cooking. Martha immediately took charge, sending Franklin to stable Zach's horse at the livery, directing Vanessa to the spare bedroom to refresh herself and Emma, and insisting that Zach make himself comfortable in the parlor. "Dinner will be ready shortly," she announced. "And I want to hear every detail of your journey." Left alone briefly in the bedroom, Vanessa stood by the window, watching as Franklin led Zach's horse away. The reality of her arrival in Douglas was settling in, along with the growing certainty that Zach would soon ride out of her life. The thought left an emptiness in her chest that no amount of Martha's warm welcome could fill. Emma, sensing her mother's distress, began to fuss in her arms. "It's all right, sweet girl," Vanessa murmured, though the words were as much for herself as for the baby. "We're safe now, we're home." But as she spoke the words, Vanessa realized that home had come to mean something different during their journey, not a place, but a feeling of security and belonging that she had found in Zach's steady presence. Dinner was a lively affair, with Martha peppering them with questions about their journey. Zach, to Vanessa's surprise, spoke more than usual, recounting their experiences with a storyteller's skill that kept the Bells enthralled. He downplayed his own heroism in rescuing Vanessa and Emma from the river, instead emphasizing Vanessa's courage and determination throughout their ordeal. "She's the bravest woman I've ever met," he said, his eyes meeting Vanessa's across the table. "Held onto that baby through raging waters that would have defeated most men, let alone a woman half-drowned herself. Providence brought you to that riverbank, Mr. Xavier," Martha declared firmly, "and Providence brought you all safely to us." Franklin nodded agreement, refilling Zach's coffee cup. "We insist you stay with us while you're in Douglas. The spare room above the store is small but comfortable." Zach shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That's kind of you, but I wouldn't want to impose." "The hotel will suit me fine for a night or two." "Nonsense," Martha replied. "It's the least we can do." Vanessa watched the exchange with a mixture of hope and anxiety. At least Zach wasn't planning to ride out immediately, but a night or two suggested he didn't intend to linger. As the evening progressed, Emma began to fuss with exhaustion after the excitement of the day. Vanessa excused herself to put the baby to bed in the small room Martha had prepared, complete with a cradle that Franklin had brought down from the attic. "It was our son William's," Martha explained wistfully. "He's in Denver now with children of his own. I've saved it all these years, hoping it might be used again." Vanessa thanked her cousin with a tight hug, touched by the thoughtfulness. As she settled Emma in the cradle, singing softly until the baby's eyes drifted closed, she could hear the murmur of conversation from the parlor, Zach's deep voice interspersed with Franklin's more precise tones. When she returned, she found the men discussing the Apache activity that had concerned them on their journey. "Army lieutenant came through last week," Franklin was saying. "Said they're tracking a small band that broke from the reservation. Nothing too serious yet, but they've been warning travelers to be cautious." "That's why we took the mining road," Zach confirmed. "Longer route, but safer." "Always thinking of their safety," Martha said approvingly. "You're a good man, Mr. Xavier." Vanessa slipped back into her chair, noting the way Zach's eyes sought hers as she entered, a small smile softening his weathered features. Something had shifted between them during their journey, a growing awareness, an unspoken connection that transcended their initial roles of rescuer and rescued. As the evening wound down, Martha insisted on showing Zach to the room above the store, leaving Vanessa and Franklin in the parlor. "Your cousin is a fine woman," Franklin said as he banked the fire for the night. "She's been beside herself with worry since the news of the flooding reached us." "She's very kind," Vanessa agreed. "You both are, to welcome us so warmly." Franklin adjusted his spectacles, studying her with shrewd eyes. "And Mr. Xavier, he seems a decent sort." "He is," Vanessa replied, perhaps too quickly. "We owe him everything." Franklin nodded thoughtfully. "Not many men would escort a woman and child all this way without expectations." Vanessa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Xavier is a gentleman. He never—" She stopped, realizing Franklin's implication. "He rescued us because it was the right thing to do, nothing more." Franklin's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced, but he merely nodded again. "Well, he's welcome to stay as long as he wishes. Any man who would risk his life for strangers has a place at our table." Later, as Vanessa prepared for bed in the room she would share with Emma, she found herself drawn to the window. From there, she could see the light still burning in the room above the store where Zach was staying. Was he, too, standing at his window, looking toward the house? Was he already planning his departure, his next destination? The thought sent a pang through her heart. In less than a week, this quiet, honorable man had become essential to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Yet she had no claim on him, no right to ask him to abandon the freedom he clearly valued for a ready-made family with all its responsibilities. Emma stirred in her cradle, bringing Vanessa back to reality. Her daughter was her first priority, her reason for coming to Douglas. Martha and Franklin offered security, stability, a chance to build a respectable life far from the scandal that would have followed her in St. Louis. That was what mattered, not foolish dreams about a wandering cowboy with kind eyes. Yet as she finally turned from the window and climbed into bed, it was Zach's face she saw in the darkness, his quiet smile, the strength in his hands as he lifted Emma, the way he had looked at her across the fire there last night in the cabin. Foolishness, she whispered to herself. Pure foolishness? But her heart refused to listen. Morning brought the bustle of a new day in Douglas. The mercantile opened early, with Franklin attending to customers while Martha fussed over breakfast for the household. Vanessa, having risen with Emma's first cries, found herself helping in the kitchen, falling naturally into the rhythm of family life. Zach appeared as they were sitting down to eat, hat in hand and looking somewhat uncomfortable in the domestic setting. His hair was damp from washing, his clothes as neat as trail-worn garments could be. "Good morning, Mr. Xavier," Martha greeted warmly. "I hope you slept well." "Yes, madam, thank you," he replied, taking the seat indicated. His eyes found Vanessa across the table, a quiet good morning passing between them without words. Emma, seated on Vanessa's lap, immediately reached towards Zach with a delighted gurgle, recognizing her rescuer and traveling companion. The baby's obvious affection brought smiles to everyone at the table. "She certainly knows who her hero is," Martha observed, passing a platter of biscuits. "Just familiar is all," Zach demurred, though he reached across to let Emma grasp his finger in her characteristic grip. "She's a friendly little thing." As they ate, Franklin discussed the day's business at the mercantile, including several orders that needed to be filled and deliveries expected from Tucson. Vanessa found herself automatically offering to help, eager to begin contributing to the household that had welcomed her so generously. "Nonsense," Martha declared. "You've only just arrived after a harrowing journey. Take a few days to settle in. There will be plenty of time for work later." "I don't mind," Vanessa insisted. "I'd like to learn the business to be useful." Zach watched this exchange with an unreadable expression, his eyes moving between Vanessa and the bells. When Franklin excused himself to open the store, Zach rose as well. "I should see to my horse," he said. "And perhaps inquire about work at the livery." Vanessa felt her heart skip at this indication he might stay, at least temporarily. "Will we see you for dinner?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "If it's no imposition," Zach replied, looking to Martha. "Of course not," Martha assured him. "You're welcome at our table for as long as you're in Douglas." As Zach departed, his hand brushing lightly against Emma's head in farewell, Vanessa found herself watching him go with a sense of loss that seemed disproportionate to a temporary parting. Martha, observing this, smiled knowingly but said nothing. The day passed quickly as Vanessa settled into her new surroundings. Despite Martha's protests, she insisted on helping in the store during the afternoon, learning the inventory and meeting some of the townspeople who came to shop and, more importantly, to satisfy their curiosity about the newcomers. News of her river rescue had spread quickly through Douglas, with several customers expressing amazement at her survival and admiration for that Xavier fellow who had saved her and the baby. Vanessa found herself telling the story repeatedly, each retelling bringing back vivid memories of Zach's strength and courage. "He's quite something, your rescuer," commented Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife, after hearing the tale. "Not many single men would take responsibility for a woman and child that way. Shows exceptional character." "Mr. Xavier was simply being kind," Vanessa replied, though the words felt inadequate to describe all that Zach had done for them. Kindness is rare enough these days, Mrs. Peterson said with a meaningful look. And a man like that steady, capable, good with children well, such men don't remain unattached for long in these parts. The implication was clear enough to bring color to Vanessa's cheeks, but before she could formulate a response, the store's door opened and Zach himself entered. He removed his hat as he crossed the threshold, nodding politely to Mrs. Peterson before approaching the counter where Vanessa stood. "Miss Keller," he greeted formally, conscious of the other customer's interested observation. "I was hoping to speak with Mr. Bell. He's in the back, taking inventory," Vanessa replied, her pulse quickening at the sight of him. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," Zach assured her with a small smile, "just some business to discuss." As he moved toward the back of the store, Mrs. Peterson leaned closer to Vanessa. "My point exactly," she whispered with a knowing smile. "Don't let that one get away, dear." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of customers and tasks. Vanessa found herself constantly aware of Zach's presence in the store, where he and Franklin appeared to be engaged in serious discussion at the back counter. Occasionally, she would catch his eye across the room, their gazes connecting briefly before each returned to their respective tasks. By closing time, Emma was growing fussy, overtired from the excitement of the day and the attention of countless admirers. Vanessa had just taken her into the house to nurse her when Zach and Franklin emerged from the store, still deep in conversation. "It's settled then," Franklin was saying as they entered the kitchen where Martha was preparing dinner. "You'll start tomorrow." "If you're certain," Zach replied, his tone suggesting some reservation. "Absolutely," Franklin assured him. "It's been needing attention for months, and with Vanessa helping Martha in the store, I can spare the time to work with you." Vanessa looked up from where she sat with Emma, curiosity evident in her expression. "What's this?" Martha turned from the stove, equally interested. "Yes, what are you two plotting?" Franklin adjusted his spectacles, looking pleased with himself. "Mr. Xavier has agreed to help rebuild the storage shed behind the store. The roof's been leaking since winter, and with the new shipments coming from Tucson, we need the space. And he's also agreed to stay on for a while to help with some other repairs," Martha added, her eyes twinkling as she caught Vanessa's expression. "Isn't that wonderful news?" "That's very generous of Mr. Xavier," Vanessa managed, her heart suddenly lighter than it had been all day. Zach shrugged, his eyes meeting hers briefly. "Seems like the least I can do to repay your family's hospitality." "Nonsense," Franklin declared. "We'll pay a fair wage, and with the room above the store sitting empty, it only makes sense for you to stay there while you work for us." The arrangement was presented as purely practical, but Vanessa wasn't fooled. The knowing glance that passed between Martha and Franklin confirmed her suspicion that her cousins were deliberately creating reasons for Zach to remain in Douglas and close to her and Emma. Dinner that evening had a celebratory air, with Martha producing a bottle of wine Franklin had been saving for a special occasion. As they ate, conversation flowed easily, with Zach gradually relaxing into the family atmosphere. "Tell us more about yourself, Mr. Xavier," Martha urged as she served apple pie for dessert. "Vanessa mentioned your sisters are in California." "Yes, madam," Zach confirmed. "All three married now with families of their own." "And you never felt the pull to settle down?" Martha asked with studied casualness. Zach glanced briefly at Vanessa before answering. "The opportunity never presented itself at the right time, I suppose." "Well, Douglas is a growing town," Franklin observed. "Plenty of opportunity for a man with your skills." The livery owner was just saying he could use a partner with horse knowledge, someone who might eventually take over when he retires. The suggestion hung in the air, its implication clear. Vanessa studied her pie, afraid her face might betray the hope that had sprung up at Franklin's words. "I'll keep that in mind," Zach said noncommittally. "For now, I'm content to help with your repairs, Mr. Bell." After dinner, when Emma had been put to bed and Martha and Franklin had retired to their room, Vanessa found herself alone with Zach on the small porch behind the house. The spring night was cool but pleasant, stars emerging in a sky washed clean by the recent rains. Your cousins are good people, Zach said after a comfortable silence. You're fortunate to have found such a welcome. They've been very generous, Vanessa agreed, with both of us. Zach nodded, his profile outlined against the darkening sky as he gazed toward the distant hills. I've been thinking about what you said about wanting Emma to have the family you lost. Yes, you'll have that here, he said softly. The Bells already adore her, and you. They'll give you both the stability you deserve. Vanessa felt her heart sink at his words, at what remained unspoken. And you, what will you do when the repairs are finished? Zach was quiet for so long that Vanessa thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice held a note of uncertainty she hadn't heard before. I've been wandering for a long time, Vanessa, too long maybe, living day to day, trail to trail. He turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light. But these past days, traveling with you and Emma, I've started to question if that's enough anymore. Hope flickered in Vanessa's chest, but she cautioned herself against reading too much into his words. What are you saying, Zach? He moved closer, his hand finding hers in the darkness. I'm saying I'd like to stay in Douglas for a while, to see where this might lead. His fingers tightened around hers. If that's something you might want too, Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. I would like that very much. In the gentle night air, with the sounds of the town settling around them, Zach slowly leaned forward. His lips met hers in a tender, questioning kiss there first. Vanessa responded with a hesitant eagerness, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they parted, Zach rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. I never expected to find you, he whispered. Never thought I'd want to stop wandering until I saw you fighting that river with Emma in your arms. Vanessa smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Perhaps the river knew exactly where it was taking us, after all. Spring bloomed fully into summer as Zach became a familiar presence in the Bell household and the wider Douglas community. The storage shed was repaired, then the porch, then the roof of the house itself. Each project completed was followed by another, as if Franklin was determined to keep Zach occupied and nearby. For Vanessa, these weeks brought a deepening contentment she had not known was possible. During the day, she worked in the mercantile alongside Martha, learning the business while Emma charmed customers from a basket behind the counter. In the evenings, they gathered as a family, for that was how she had come to think of them all, for meals and conversation. And afterward, when Emma was asleep and the Bells had retired, there were precious moments alone with Zach. Sometimes they walked through the quiet streets of Douglas, his hand warm around hers. Other times they simply sat on the porch, talking of their pasts, their hopes, their growing feelings for each other. Their courtship progressed with deliberate patience. Zach was mindful of Vanessa's previous experience and determined that this time she would be properly honored. For her part, Vanessa found herself falling deeper in love with this quiet, steadfast man who had saved not just her life, but her faith in humanity. Emma, now crawling and beginning to pull herself up on furniture, had formed an undeniable bond with Zach. Her face lit up whenever he entered a room, and she would speed crawl toward him with delighted determination, arms raised in clear demand to be lifted. Zach obliged each time, his large hands gentle as he swung her into the air, her giggles the sweetest music Vanessa had ever heard. By midsummer, Zach had indeed begun working at the livery alongside old Mr. Hollister, who made no secret of his hope that Zach would eventually buy him out. The arrangement suited Zach's skills, perfectly breaking and training horses, shoeing, and occasionally guiding newcomers through the surrounding territory. On a warm July evening, with sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Zach suggested a ride to a spot he had discovered just outside town, a small rise overlooking a bend in the river where wildflowers grew in abundance. Martha eagerly volunteered to watch Emma, practically shooing them out the door with a picnic basket she had seemingly prepared in anticipation. As they rode double on Zach's horse, the same reliable mount that had carried them all the way from the flooded river, Vanessa felt a sense of completion. Here she was, returning to the river that had nearly claimed her life, but this time with the man who had saved her, whose arms now encircled her protectively as they rowed. The spot was as beautiful as Zach had promised, with a sweeping view of the valley and the town nestled within it. They spread a blanket amid the wildflowers and unpacked Martha's generous basket: fried chicken, biscuits, apple tarts, and a bottle of sweet wine. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the landscape, Zach grew uncharacteristically quiet. Vanessa, sensing his preoccupation, waited patiently. Whatever was on his mind he would share when ready. Finally, he turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Vanessa," he began, his voice steady despite the nervousness in his eyes. "Before I met you, I thought my life would always be on the move, that I wasn't meant for settling in one place." Vanessa's heart quickened, but she remained silent, letting him continue. "But now I can't imagine a life without you and Emma in it. Every morning I wake up wondering how I got so lucky, and every night I thank God for bringing me to that riverbank at exactly the right moment." He reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet pouch. "I'm not a wealthy man, and I can't offer you grand things. But I can offer you my heart, my name, and my promise to love and protect both you and Emma for as long as I live." From the pouch, he withdrew a ring, a simple gold band set with a small, perfect emerald. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman who embodied the same strength and grace that she did. I've been carrying it for years, waiting. Now I know why." Tears blurred Vanessa's vision as Zach continued, his voice growing more confident with each word. "Vanessa Keller, will you marry me? Will you allow me the honor of being a father to Emma and a husband to you, of building a life together here in Douglas or wherever our path may lead?" "Yes," Vanessa whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Zachary Xavier, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the emerald catching the last rays of sunset, Zach drew her into his arms. Their kiss was deep and tender, a promise of the life they would share. When they finally broke apart, Vanessa rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she confessed. "After everything that happened in St. Louis, I'd resigned myself to building a quiet life for Emma, but not expecting much joy for myself." "You deserve every happiness," Zach murmured against her hair. "Both of you do." As twilight deepened around them, they gathered their things and mounted the horse for the ride back to town. Vanessa leaned back against Zach's chest, secure in his embrace, the weight of his mother's ring a tangible reminder of the future that awaited them. "When should we tell the bells?" she asked as the lights of Douglas came into view. Zach chuckled, his breath warm against her ear. "Something tells me they won't be entirely surprised." Indeed, Martha's knowing smile when they returned, and the speed with which she spotted the ring on Vanessa's finger, suggested that their engagement had been anticipated, perhaps even orchestrated to some degree. "Well, it's about time," was all she said, embracing them both before whisking Vanessa away to discuss wedding plans. Franklin shook Zach's hand firmly, his approval evident in the gesture. "You'll make her happy," he said simply. "That's all we wanted for our Vanessa." Emma, awakened by the commotion, added her own approval by lunging from Martha's arms towards Zach with such enthusiasm that he had to move quickly to catch her. "See, she already knows you're her papa now," Vanessa said softly, watching the two most important people in her life together. The wedding took place in early September, when the worst of summer's heat had passed, but before the chill of autumn descended on the high desert. The entire town of Douglas turned out for the occasion, the small church overflowing with well-wishers drawn by the romantic story of their meeting the dramatic river rescue that had led to love. Vanessa wore a gown of ivory satin that Martha and several of the town's women had worked on secretly for weeks. Emma, now standing with assistants and taking her first tentative steps, was dressed in a matching miniature gown, her dark curls adorned with tiny white flowers. Zach, standing at the altar in a new black suit, watched with undisguised emotion as Franklin escorted Vanessa down the aisle, Emma in her mother's arms. In that moment, as sunlight streamed through the church's stained glass windows, bathing them all in rainbow hues. Zach Xavier knew with absolute certainty that he had found his home. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving, with vows that acknowledged the unusual beginning of their relationship. "From the waters that threatened to take you, I found the greatest treasure of my life," Zach said as he placed the gold band beside his mother's ring on Vanessa's finger. "I promise to cherish that gift every day we have together." Vanessa, her voice steady despite the tears shining in her eyes, responded, "You saved more than our lives that day. You saved my belief in goodness, in the possibility of love. I promise to honor that gift by loving you completely, faithfully for all our days." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Zach kissed his bride to the cheers of the assembled townsfolk, Emma reached up from Vanessa's arms to pat both their faces, as if bestowing her own blessing on the union. The celebration afterward was held in the town square, with tables laden with food prepared by every family in Douglas. There was music and dancing, laughter and tears, and a general sense that this marriage represented something special, a testament to courage, to fate, to the unexpected ways that lives can intersect and be forever changed. As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the square, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Zach led Vanessa in a dance reminiscent of their first on the hilltop outside town. Emma had long since fallen asleep in Martha's arms, exhausted by the excitement and attention. "Happy, Mrs. Xavier?" Zach asked softly as they moved together beneath the stars. "More than I ever thought possible," Vanessa replied, her green eyes reflecting the lantern light. "And you, any regrets about giving up your wandering ways?" Zach's arms tightened around her. "Only that it took me so long to find you." In the weeks that followed, they settled into their new life together. Mr. Hollister, true to his word, offered Zach partnership in the livery with an eye toward full ownership within the year. The arrangement provided a stable income and work that Zach enjoyed, while still allowing him time with his new family. Franklin and Martha insisted that the newlyweds continue living in the house behind the mercantile, which had been expanded during the summer to include a larger bedroom for the growing family and a proper sitting room. The arrangement benefited everyone. The Bells had the family presence they had longed for, while Vanessa and Zach had support as they adjusted to married life. Emma, thriving in this environment of love and security, began walking confidently just weeks after the wedding. Her first word, "Papa," directed unambiguously at Zach as he entered the house after work, brought tears to his eyes and a fierce pride that surprised him with its intensity. "She really is mine now, isn't she?" he whispered to Vanessa that night after Emma had been tucked into her bed. "She always was," Vanessa replied, curling against him in their own bed. "From the moment you pulled us from that river, some bonds don't need blood to make them real." As winter approached, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rainstorms that turned the streets of Douglas to mud, Vanessa made a discovery that filled her with both joy and trepidation. After a week of unexplained fatigue and morning illness, she realized she was carrying Zach's child. She shared the news with him on a quiet evening by the fire, after Emma had been put to bed. His reaction stunned silence, followed by a whoop of joy that startled the cat dozing on the hearth, erased any lingering doubts she might have harbored about his readiness for another child. "Are you certain?" he asked, kneeling before her chair and placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "As certain as I can be," she replied, covering his hand with her own. "The baby should arrive in late spring, around the anniversary of when you found us in the river." Zach shook his head in wonder. Life has a poetry to it sometimes, doesn't it? 1 year from near tragedy to new life. The winter passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. The livery prospered under Zach's management, attracting business from surrounding ranches and travelers alike. Vanessa continued working in the mercantile until her condition made it difficult, at which point Martha insisted she rest more and focus on Emma and the coming baby. Letters arrived regularly from Zach's sisters in California, expressing delight at the news of both his marriage and the expected child. Plans were made for Rebecca to visit in the summer, bringing her children to meet their new cousin and uncle's family. As spring returned to the high desert, bringing wildflowers and new growth to the landscape, Vanessa found herself drawn repeatedly to the river that had nearly claimed her life a year earlier. Now swollen again with spring runoff, though not as dramatically as the previous year, the waterway held no fear for her. Instead, she saw it as the beginning of her journey to happiness, the catalyst that had brought Zach into her life. On a warm May afternoon, with Emma napping under Martha's watchful eye, Zach took Vanessa for a gentle walk along the riverbank. Her time was near, her body heavy with their child, yet she insisted on daily exercise. "It feels right to be here," she said as they paused to rest on a fallen log overlooking the water. "To come full circle." Zach's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I still dream about it, sometimes seeing you in those rapids." Emma clutched to your chest. "I've never been so frightened or so certain of what I needed to do." Vanessa leaned her head against his shoulder. "God's hand was in it all, bringing you to that exact spot at that exact moment. And bringing me the family I never knew I wanted," Zach added, placing his hand on her rounded belly. As if in response, the baby kicked strongly against his palm. "Strong like his mama, or her papa," Vanessa countered with a smile. They had chosen not to guess the baby's gender, agreeing that healthy was all that mattered. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the river flow past, each lost in thoughts of the year that had brought them together and the future stretching before them. The peace of the moment was broken suddenly by Vanessa's sharp intake of breath, her hand flying to her abdomen. "Vanessa." Zach's voice held immediate concern. "I think," she said slowly, "that our baby has decided today is the day to meet us." Zach was on his feet instantly, helping her to stand. "Can you walk back to town? Should I carry you?" Vanessa laughed despite the discomfort of the contraction. "I can walk, Zach. First babies take time, we have hours yet." But their child, like its mother, proved determined and strong-willed. By the time they reached the house, Vanessa's contractions were coming regularly, and Martha was already sending Franklin for the midwife. "This little one is in a hurry," the midwife announced after examining Vanessa. "Must take after its father, always on the move." Zach paced the kitchen while Emma watched curiously from her high chair, somehow sensing the importance of the occasion. Martha kept both of them occupied with small tasks, preventing Zach from wearing a hole in the floorboards with his anxious movement. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades reminiscent of their engagement evening, a new cry joined the household, strong, indignant, and unmistakably healthy. Zach froze in his tracks, his eyes fixed on the bedroom door, which opened moments later to reveal the midwife's smiling face. "Congratulations, Mr. Xavier," she said. "You have a son." Emma, recognizing the significance if not the exact meaning of the words, clapped her hands delightedly. "Baby," she exclaimed, one of the few words in her growing vocabulary. Zach entered the bedroom to find Vanessa propped up on pillows, her face glowing with exhaustion and joy, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her smile radiant. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Zach sat carefully on the edge of the bed, overcome with emotion as Vanessa placed the swaddled infant in his arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he blinked up at his father, eyes that promised to be as blue as Zach's own. "He's perfect," Zach whispered, one finger gently tracing the tiny features, "just like his mother." "What shall we call him?" Vanessa asked, though they had discussed names at length during the preceding months. Zach considered the small face, so new yet somehow familiar. "William," he said finally, "after your cousin's son, who made this possible by leaving Douglas and creating a place for you here." "William Zachary Xavier," Vanessa agreed. "A good, strong name for a boy born of the river." As if understanding the significance of the moment, little William opened his eyes fully, his gaze seeming to fix on his father's face with remarkable clarity for a newborn. "Welcome to the world, William," Zach said, his voice thick with emotion. "You come from brave stock, son. Your mama faced down a raging river to bring your sister to safety, and I was lucky enough to be there to help." Martha appeared at the doorway with Emma in her arms, the little girl straining to see what was happening. Carefully, Zach beckoned them over, making room on the bed for Emma to sit beside her mother while he held the baby where she could see him. "Emma, this is your brother William," Vanessa said, watching as her daughter regarded the newcomer with solemn curiosity. After a moment of careful consideration, Emma reached out one small finger to touch the baby's cheek. "Baby," she said with decided approval. "That's right," Zach confirmed, "your baby brother." As Martha discreetly withdrew to give the new family privacy, Zach looked around at the three people who had become his world: Vanessa, his brave and beautiful wife; Emma, the daughter of his heart if not his blood; and now William, the son he had never dared to dream of having. "A year ago I was a wanderer with no real home and no fixed purpose," he said softly. "Now look at what I have, what we have." Vanessa reached for his hand, her green eyes shining with love. "The river brought us together, but it's love that made us a family." In the gentle twilight of that spring evening, as Douglas settled into quiet around them, and the distant sound of the river provided a soothing backdrop to their new beginning, Zach Xavier held his family close and knew that his wandering days were over. He had found his true home not in a place, but in the hearts of those who loved him. And as little William slept peacefully in his arms, Emma curled trustingly against his side, and Vanessa watched them all with contented eyes. Zach offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the flood that had changed everything for the woman who had fought the rapids with a baby in her arms, and for the chance he had been given to save them both, and in doing so, save himself from a lifetime of solitary wandering. Outside the window, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, constants in a changing world, much like the love that had begun in danger and blossomed into the surest foundation any family could wish for. The river that had nearly taken everything from Vanessa had instead given her everything she had ever wanted: a home, a family, and a love strong enough to withstand any current life might send their way.